Yeah, so my presentation today is about recruiting and sustaining a diverse and inclusive workforce. Um, and it is a case study, so it's my own story. So I'm pretty early in my career, and this presentation is going to be very narrative. There's going to be lots of pictures, and I'm hoping that it's sort of a fresh perspective, or for people later in their careers, maybe a reminder of how we got here and what that looks like, especially for underrepresented individuals. Of course, I am a white woman, so that my underrepresentation really only goes so far. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in women's groups in particular, just because there are so many women available to pull from, which I think I have a slide on later. So today I'm gonna talk about my experience, and I think I hit the wrong slide. Okay, so like I said, I'm Nicole. I am a research software engineer in the Scientific Solutions group at Purdue. And so I work on science gateways, and I work with researchers on their own research code. I'm here today to talk more about my experience as a co-chair of Women in HPC and what we can do as members of USRSC to improve, especially recruitment. I mean, also a little bit of inclusion, and I'll touch on both of those. What we're going to learn from my experience is that recruitment is definitely a grassroots effort that is spurred on a lot by word of mouth and a lot of communication across campus and organizations. So in the diversity inclusion group, we talk about other things like mentorship, potentially starting up a program like something mentorship related, or other initiatives. And I think there's a lot of really good things that USRSC can do to improve diversity and inclusion. But in terms of recruitment specifically, I think a lot of that work is going to need to happen on the ground. And I think my experience shows that. The other thing is that I think for me, inclusion I've found that I've felt most included where there is some sort of community, formal or informal community. And so working with or establishing communities is probably the easiest way to improve inclusion, because it gives us a platform to talk about these things in sort of a non-intrusive way. So I will talk about, I am not a manager of an RSE group, so I am not going to go into how our group operates, but I will say I talked to my manager about recruitment and her perspectives on it. And so for our group, we do a lot of recruiting through internships and RA-ships, whether it's undergraduates or graduate students. And we have a preference for computer science students. And word of mouth is the number one way that we find people. For our RSE group, that word of mouth is through faculty. Through the cyber infrastructure group, it is, they said that it's more students recommending other students. I think it is a good way to sort of that people, especially when you are hiring from a sort of diverse experience pool, sort of a low cost way to test out people with diverse paths into the career. And the other takeaway that I got from talking to my manager is that, West Lafayette in Purdue maybe isn't like the coolest campus that ever was. But people do, we people intern and they stay after graduation, myself included. And, why is that? There's something really intrinsically interesting about research software engineering, and we better use that to our advantage when we're recruiting people. Yeah, so as I said, this is mostly my experience. And we'll start from sort of the beginning. So really it's gonna start as like a bad graduate application would read. So my love of software starts and ends with a passion for science. I started at IU, Indiana University, doing all the kinds of sciences that there were. And I mean, like archaeology and all sorts of crazy things, and astronomy, and I landed on biology. I got the sense from my lab classes that research was all about pipetting in a basement lab with no windows and fluorescent lighting. And so I didn't want to be a researcher because that's my whole conception. And I didn't want to be a medical professional. So I spent a lot of years trying to search for the right thing for me. I also wanted to make money after I graduated. So, with biology, there's a lot of career paths that seem to require a lot of education that I also wasn't interested in pursuing at the time. So the way that I found research software engineering, I thought that I would transfer to Purdue because I was at Indiana and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I thought, oh, I'll go to Purdue and then I'll do engineering, which in my head was like people who like science, but there's like a job at the end. So while I was getting ready and taking classes to switch to engineering, I was required to take a computer science class, or actually it was a programming class for scientists, C programming, and I absolutely loved it. That I think those of us that code, all these scientists in the class were like just screaming at their semicolons and they just hated it. And I just thought that when you went through and you understood it, that it was just so rewarding. So I switched to computer science and math. From math, actually. I think I had switched from biology to math. And at the time, even though I was taking a programming class for scientists, I still didn't have this conception that research software engineering exists. Like I didn't understand that you can do both of those things together. So my next step was to take an internship at an automotive company because I was in CS and I still didn't quite understand what this RSE thing was. I absolutely did not like it. It was fine, but I learned the industry is not for me. And I think this is something we can, I think is common to many people in our field. We're not in it. We're not here because of the big bucks, right? Like if I want to go make $1 million, I would be in industry, but that's not what drew me to it. So I'm at Purdue. I'm now a computer science major, but I don't want to be an industry software engineering. And so I'm like, what do I do? I'm about to graduate. And so I say, well, I'll try this research thing again. And so I reached out to my first research mentor, and he just handed me this project. I was like, oh, like I want to do software engineering, but I don't like industry. What do I do? And so he gave me a project where I was using supercomputers to do math research. So furthering my conception that we can use computing to do science. And I thought this was really amazing. So I guess my first point is that broadening participation, I think, includes reaching out to whether it's scientists as I have sciences as I have on this slide, or humanities, or all the other groups. There is a much more there are many more women in some of these. Like I said, I came from biology where there's 60% women. And it's not that I didn't like computing, but I found science more intrinsically interesting. So I think the takeaway is that we can broaden participation by recruiting from these groups that have bigger numbers of diverse populations. So I had my first undergraduate research experience, and yeah, so networking was one of the big takeaways from my experience. So word of mouth was really important. My research mentor forwarded me to my now manager, Carol Song, and she forwarded me to Women in HPC. And Women in HPC, the two of them encouraged me to apply for a travel award to PERC, which was a perfectly reasonable place to present the kind of research that I was doing. And I absolutely loved it. Conferences are super motivating. I felt the student experience made me feel like there was a community of people like me, still not quite understanding what research software engineering was. Now I sort of understood that maybe research was also a part of the equation for me. And I didn't know what the career path was, but I knew I was on the right track at this point. So yeah, so through Women in HPC as a student, I got to present my undergraduate research in meetings. I got to present my experience in the student cluster competition, which I'll talk about. And let's see. And yeah, so it just made me feel really included, and like there was a community of people surrounding the people that I thought maybe I would end up working with. So yeah, so then my next step was doing the student cluster competition, which was also run by Women in HPC. And there were students from a lot of backgrounds: CS, math, neuroscience, cybersecurity, and students, two of these students, myself included, were at some point hired to work for some part of our research computing. And so so this experience was a really good recruitment experience. And as I was already working with Women in HPC, I had the idea, working with the woman running it, oh, let's reach out and go to existing groups on campus to recruit people to this event. So we found women in computer science, women in, I think it's WISP, Women in Science at Purdue, women in engineering. And so the takeaway is that we used groups on campus to recruit for our event. And I think whether this is just a call out at the end of their event, whether it's just informational or it's recruiting for some specific activity, whether it be an internship or a student cluster competition or whatever it is, I think it's invaluable to use the diversity groups on campus as a place to pull from. So, right, so I guess this is the inclusivity note. Now, one of the favorite parts of my job is working with USRSE and Women in HPC to bring about diversity and inclusion initiatives. It just gives me a real sense of community, and I think that's really important for keeping people around. And like I said, I think having a formalized group such as this makes it so much easier to bring issues up in conversation and to really improve the level of inclusivity. So the real takeaway for people who would like to improve recruitment and retention in research software engineering, I think it's a real, like I said, I think recruitment in particular is a really grassroots effort, and it requires reaching outside of our current community, right? We're not, so maybe broadening participation is actually a better way to think about it than recruitment, right? Because you're not bringing people to you, you're going out to them. So spreading the word and encouraging students to participate in RST adjacent activities. So for me, that was getting invited to go apply for a travel grant to PERC, which is something I absolutely never would have done on my own. And that experience, it bolstered my resume, and it got me really interested in the career. Encouraging somebody to start a community or and giving them the support they need is one way we can improve diversity. I add that little piece at the end. A lot of the time, the people who are trying to do the work to improve inclusivity are the ones that are marginalized, and the extra work actually keeps them from being as successful. So it's important to also give them the support they need. But if you have somebody maybe that in your group that you think might be interested, to go actively encourage them to do that. We can write better inclusive solicitations. I think I'll probably do a blog post here pretty soon. I committed to that a bit ago. There are, like little web apps to even improve the language and things such as this. And I think we can maybe the biggest thing is to recruit students from existing communities on campus. And actually, I have identified there is one person that runs all of the career counseling in the College of Science. And they send out so many emails. And, I have considered sending an email out to them saying, oh, this is research software engineering. And if you have students that have similar interests, you might encourage them to speak with us. So I think these are efforts that can, with a more lower bar of recruitment. Although I will say that I don't think that just spreading the word about the career is enough. I think for diversity and inclusion, we really need to focus on opportunities for students, whether it's internships or other experiences. Getting the word out might be good enough for somebody with a more similar background, but when we're trying to broaden participation, actually creating the internship or creating the activity and having that for them is really important. Some higher bar things that we can think about are starting a community newsletter organization. Again, creating those opportunities for students, and developing talent instead of finding it. I think, and again, I'm not a manager, but I think that especially like the less senior the student is, like the lower the bar is to test out someone maybe that has a less coding experience or less experience, it's traditional experience, and developing their skills. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. So we have a few questions in the chat. Let's see here. So I think the question was asked when we were discussing, or you were discussing student participation, and why not adults or older adults, maybe recruiting classes and universities or other places. And that, I'm not sure. That seems like a general question, perhaps. Do you know if there's any outreach opportunities at Purdue or otherwise that you've seen that would target not just students, but other like staff and other folks?
Yeah, so, right. So Women in HPC targets faculty and staff as well. It's inclusive of those participants. I guess I don't disagree at all. I really more am just speaking to my experience as a student and what worked for me. But I do think that it is important to include and educate on all levels. So in part for the networking, or so we can, I think, there's plenty we can learn from each other, whether a person is early enough to transition into research software engineering, or if it's just helpful for us to share information.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's any questions that you have, if you'd like to put those into the chat. And I really appreciate you taking the time to give us that talk. That was wonderful, Nicole. It's also good. It's been a little while since I've had to go into this area, and so it's nice to hear how other biologists found their way. I always joke I'm a code curious biologist. And I work with a lot of biology curious coders, so it's good to know that I'm not alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a question. Oh yeah, Reed, if you've got a question, go ahead and ask.
First of all, fantastic presentation. Loved it. And of course, I'm in complete agreement on all of the major points that you brought up. I have a question for you, though, but I want to gather your thoughts. So when you talk about developing talent, how do you see that like as connected to the broader challenge of retention? Because I think, retaining RSEs, making them feel wanted and that they belong is important.
How do I mean, I agree with those things separately. How are they connected though? Sorry?
I just wanted to pick your brain. There's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, sure. So I guess those with more non-traditional backgrounds might have maybe bigger issues with imposter syndrome. So making people feel like their non-traditional background is welcomed and valued is a part of inclusivity that improves retention, I would say.
Yeah. And so Ian asks, do you have any suggestions on how to sell or advertise internships and fellowships, how to reach out to people as you were describing? It sounded like you had a mentor, perhaps, that kind of reached out to you. How did that come about?
Well, okay, so it depends on what you're talking about. So my undergraduate research experience, I reached out to my mentor, and it just so happens that this person was a really nice and wonderful mentor. It was a total cold email. I walked in there, and it was a really, he was just a really great mentor. So that just worked out, right? And we all need that foot in the door, because from there, that he was the one who forwarded me to all of the people in research computing. That made me feel at home there before I knew what a research software engineer was. So I guess I would say that word of mouth was again super important, and a part of mentorship being networking for another person. Even when there's not anything specific that will come out of it, that's exactly what happened. He forwarded me to my manager, and she forwarded me to women in HPC before we even started talking about internships, right? So the network is so important. So on top of I think, so there's two things. There is networking, just passing people along and making them visible, right? Especially your underrepresented individuals. I think raising their visibility also increases their likelihood that they'll just come up on these serendipitous opportunities. And then I think the other part about maybe that Ian was getting at, I'm not sure, about like how do we recruit on campus better on the solicitation side. I would just say that to make a point that in your solicitation that you're trying to be that you welcome underrepresented groups and trying to be inclusive, and doing that in communities that already exist, right? Because it's just so easy to take advantage of somebody else's hard organizational work. And generally, you both benefit. So there's really no downside to doing that.
Yeah. There's a question here. It looks like maybe it's been answered from Mahmood. Mahmood, would you like to follow on that question about RSE interns for discussion?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your presentation, Nicole. It was great. So the intern, they can be hired with different funding sources. Like if it's coming from department that they require to have few interns, then you have more flexibility in defining a project for them. But if you have a PI, like a sponsored project, and you need an intern, then there is also an element of learning, right, for the intern. But then you need to make sure that they can deliver their project So myself, I consider learning very important for them. So there's no really tough interview as long as they can do some coding. But how do you envision like their training when the funding is coming from the PI, but at the same time, they need to deliver a project, right? They need to deliver a code or a task, yeah. Given the limited resources, that's the issue.
Yeah, I might try to just sidestep this one a little bit in terms of the funding question, right? I have very little experience with the social or financial mechanics of funding. So I would just say that I think, I think there's a lot you can accomplish with very little coding training. I think this is the part where you consider what you value in an intern and maybe try to shift that away from the experience to what maybe their talents and what they're good at, whether they're a self-starter, whether they're good at communication and getting feedback. These are all things that will make a very successful intern, even if they don't have the experience that you're looking for. And these are things that can be, found in any community. So I think learning to shift your focus in such a way that still hopefully has an output. They are a self-starter and they can achieve that output at the end because they have these other qualities.
Cool, thanks.
I have a quick question. One of the challenges that I had with my hiring manager hat was to come up with a inclusive job posting. You mentioned in your presentation that there are tools available out there, but at the end of the day, they are robots. I was wondering if we can come together to create a, feedback mechanism from real humans, from humans who care about diversity and inclusion. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on that, Nicole? Perhaps we can use the Slack channel.
Absolutely. So I was just about to suggest the Slack channel, and maybe it deserves its own channel. I'm not sure, but I actually just reposted a post from the jobs channel to the diversity and inclusion panel that I read that was just so well done and serves as a wonderful example. Because I think you're right. Yeah, I think it's helpful. The robot is helpful, but it's only so helpful. So yeah, maybe we should consider like formalizing that. And the posting was first from somebody in Michigan. I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody, either them or somebody they know is involved in USRSE, and maybe we should make some sort of database or something like that, because I think you're absolutely right.
We did that at Tech. We had a committee to go through our job listings and look at what are we saying and how do we say something that's more inclusive. And we actually wrote a paragraph that's now in all of our job descriptions that says, we invite people, even if you're not, basically sort of, even if you're not an expert in this, if you are good at, certain things or whatever, and you want to learn, and you're a quick learner and you work well with other people, please apply for this job. That's one of those statistics that they throw out from women in HBC that, guys will apply for a job if they have 3 of the 10, requirements, and women will wait until they have all 10 because they don't want to waste the hiring manager's time. And it's a horrible statistic. And I hope it's just, a story, an apocryphal story, but it's actually, it seems reasonable, unfortunately. And so when you add something like that to your job description, and there are websites, as Nicole said, and places where you can go and sort of which of these words, you put in a paragraph and it tells you which of the words you need to change, but you do your best. But adding a paragraph seems to have worked for us.
what we did was keep the basic qualification very minimum. It's basically just number of post-secondary education and work, and then additional qualification, of course, comes with this job specific. And you're right. I mean, mostly minority may not apply if they don't have all of the requirements, but guys, like, you know, they apply if they have one.
There's also kind of a perspective I'd like to add. So when I was sort of an undergrad, and I would argue even a little bit in grad school, I didn't even know what it meant to do research. I saw these people around me doing research and, you know, for medical school or whatnot. And I just totally didn't get it. And I didn't understand that until my first job. So I would venture to say that there's a lot of undergrads out there that just don't know what the heck anyone is talking about when they talk about research or research software engineering. So I don't know how this fits in, but like that would be a problem too.
And it looks like we have Abby here who actually posted that job and is telling us in the chat. Abby, would you like to discuss how you went about creating that job description that's captured the imaginations? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm not sure there's much to tell about it. We really just tried to avoid the traditional language of like a computer programmer job posting and make it more about what you're doing and why it might be interesting to you. And we ran it through the computer program, but you know, like you said, that only takes you so far. So we really tried to give it just more of a human feel. And I'm really glad you liked it.
Yeah, my kudos. I thought it was excellently done.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if anyone else would like to follow up on what Vanessa was saying, but I actually didn't even think about being a researcher either. I come from North Georgia, from something of a blue collar family, and there are no scientists in our family, let's just say. And so navigating the academic space was kind of a weird trial and experimentation in its own way for me. And so it sounds like Vanessa, oh yeah, there we are. Yeah, had a similar experience. And it was because I walked into Wayne Parrott's office and said, hey, I want your job. How do I get there? And I feel like there are a lot of us like that out there, right? That just don't have any clue of like, how do we become those things? So I'm kind of curious if there are social groups, either at Purdue or if someone on the call has those sort of things. We created something similar at the University of Arizona when I was there called Research Bazaar, which we always joked. We started off by answering questions for people, like a help desk, but it wound up being a support group. So we always joked that we were a support group masquerading as a help desk. And I wonder if those sort of things are out there to like just answer general questions from people and people who are curious about either research or software. We have a few minutes of discussion before we take a break.
I'm not really sure from my end. You know, like I said, I totally went through the same thing that Vanessa did. I even have the privilege of having doctor parents, and I knew I didn't want to do that. But even right, despite the, you'd think that some of that would wear off, and I would have some understanding of what research is, but absolutely not. And really, it was just my third try. I didn't want to do med school, and I didn't want to do industry. So it's like, well, I guess research is the last thing there is. So it was just a big aha moment for me when I realized I could do research on a computer in a room with a window instead of being the lab rat in a biology lab. That's more of a story than a solution, but I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Vanessa. maybe posing research in terms of computing. You know, I mean, there's two ways. There's taking the scientists and making them computers, or the other way around. But yeah, maybe one way is to not frame it so much as research, and to work with the CS students and show them that what research is by initially framing it as software.
Yeah, I think a related problem is just that traditional academic fabric is so rooted in these buckets of things. So when you're in college, you look around and you see people doing research, you're like, oh, well, they're working in this lab and they're doing research because they want to go to medical school. And you kind of look at all research and it sits with a domain. So you immediately ask yourself, like, well, am I interested in that domain? And if you're someone that just kind of likes building things, and maybe you don't even know that, you're not going to be like, yes, I want to go work in this lab that studies rats and then does stuff with that data, because it just isn't sort of your thing. And I guess I kind of hope that, you know, with the RSC movement and there becoming more layers of research software engineers at universities, that will be enough to just provide the awareness, like, okay, I understand there's research in biology and neuroscience, but there's also this RSC group that maybe is with research computing, and what they're doing, they're helping researchers, but they're not explicitly like doing the research. So maybe it's just sort of this natural progression for any kind of new movement, is that as the awareness grows, then, you know, the recruiting and stuff will get easier, because just by way of it being more part of that academic fabric, people will know about it and know it's something that they can at least ask about.
I mean, one of our most amazing visualization experts at TAC, who does beautiful visualizations in biology, went to school for neuroscience and didn't want to work with the actual rats anymore. And she decided she liked the computing better and she wanted to make the pictures. And she does amazing stuff. But she, you know, went full on for neuroscience and then was like, not so much.
Well, great. That actually brings us to our break, unless there's anything last to be said, or any last minute questions. Okay. I'm gonna wait the 30 seconds like I've been told by every instructor I've ever been trained by to wait. But in the meantime, let's thank Nicole. And I really appreciate your time, of course, and wonderful discussion and wonderful talk.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.